What if I told you that a simple man, wearing boots covered in dirt and a faded straw hat, let an ambitious woman believe she had pulled off the perfect move of her life, while he was silently orchestrating the most brilliant checkmate you have ever seen? This is the story of Antonio, a farmer everyone underestimated, a man the entire town believed to be just another country bumpkin lucky enough to have inherited land. But behind that simple smile and those calloused hands, there was a mind sharp as a razor, and a heart that was about to teach the most expensive lesson anyone could ever learn. When Melissa entered Antonio's life, she didn't see a man. She saw an opportunity, an easy target, a foolish man in love whom she could manipulate, marry, and then abandon with half of his fortune safely hidden away. She had the perfect plan, every step calculated, every word rehearsed. But she didn't know one thing. Antonio already knew every move she would make before she even made it. And when you underestimate a man who built an empire from nothing, who turned dry land into green gold, who learned from childhood that in the countryside you don't survive by being naive, then she isn't just making a mistake. She was stepping into a game she had already lost before it even began. Stay until the end of this story, because what Antonio did was not revenge. It was justice served with the patience of someone who plants, nurtures, and waits for the harvest. And believe me, the harvest was devastating. Before we begin, hit that like button now, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because every week I bring real stories that will make you question everything you think you know about justice, intelligence, and silent revenge. And comment below, have you ever underestimated someone and been surprised? Now let's get into the story that will change the way you see simple people forever. Antonio was 53 years old when this story began. To anyone passing through Gold Valley, on the outskirts of a small town in rural Texas, he was just another farmer. He woke up at 4:30 in the morning every single day. He drank his strong black coffee on the wooden porch of the main house, a simple 3-bedroom construction that he himself had renovated with his own hands over the years. He always wore the same clothes: faded jeans, a plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, brown boots that had stepped on every corner of that 340-hectare property. His face was marked by the sun, by the wrinkles of someone who smiles often and also of someone who has weathered storms that would have broken weaker men. Antonio was not a man of many words. At the town bar, where he sometimes stopped for a cold beer on Saturdays, he listened more than he spoke. He greeted everyone with a nod, always paid his bills in cash, and left without drawing attention. People in town liked him. Antonio is a good guy, they said. Hard-working, honest, never owes anyone anything. But no one really knew him. No one knew that this simple man, who drove a 16-year-old white Ford pickup truck, who ate lunch from a lunchbox under the mango tree every day, was actually one of the richest men in the entire state. Antonio did not inherit his fortune. He built it, grain by grain, sack by sack, deal by deal. He started with a small 10-hectare property his father had left him, more full of debt than possibilities. He was 22 years old, fresh out of a technical course in agronomy, full of dreams and without a single cent in his pocket beyond what he earned working from sunrise to sunset. In the early years, Antonio worked like few others. He planted, harvested, sold, reinvested. While other farmers burned money on imported cars and expensive parties, he bought more land. Good land, productive land, land people thought was worthless. That Antonio is crazy, people commented at the market. He's buying land where not even grass grows properly. But Antonio knew exactly what he was doing. He studied the soil, tested different crops, learned from every mistake. In 5 years, he turned that worthless land into one of the most productive soybean plantations in the region. In 10 years, he had tripled his property. In 20 years, he owned a silent empire. Beyond soybeans, Antônio diversified. He bought company stocks when no one was paying attention. He invested in agribusiness startups before the term startup even became popular in the countryside. He put money into real estate funds, government bonds, gold. He had accounts in 3 different banks and a financial advisor in Dallas who managed investments that generated millions every year, but none of this showed. Antônio continued living in the same simple house, continued driving the same old pickup truck, continued drinking coffee at Sir Joaquim's small shop, where a cup cost 2 reais. "Why don't you buy a better house, Antônio?" someone once asked. "This one serves me well," he replied with his calm smile. "It has a roof, walls, and a good bed. What more does a man need?" What people didn't understand was that Antônio had learned something fundamental very early in life. Wealth that shows itself is wealth that disappears. He had seen farmers flaunt fortunes and go bankrupt overnight. He had seen rich men become targets of kidnappings, scams, and fake friendships. Antônio chose invisibility, and that choice kept him safe for decades, safe from envious eyes, safe from opportunistic people, safe from the problems that visible money brings, until Melissa appeared. And with her, everything began to change in a way Antônio had been expecting for years, even without knowing when that day would come. It was on an ordinary Thursday in March that Melissa arrived in town. She drove a silver Civic, not very new but well cared for, and stopped at the only gas station on the main avenue to fill up and ask for directions. Melissa was 32 years old, with carefully maintained blonde hair, manicured nails, clothes that balanced casual and elegant in a way that drew attention without seeming excessive. She smiled easily, knew how to ask the right questions, and had that rare ability to make people feel important when talking to her. "I came to work at the new accounting office that's opening here," she explained to Mrs. Maria, the town's official gossip who worked at the bakery. "I'm looking for a place to rent, something simple but comfortable." Mrs. Maria, of course, was already making plans. Pretty girl, polite, arriving alone in town. She needs to meet good people around here. In 2 weeks, Melissa already knew half the town. She went to Mass on Sundays, attended the place gym, participated in community events. Women liked her because she wasn't too threatening. Men paid attention because, well, Melissa knew exactly how to be noticed. But Melissa wasn't interested in just any man. She had a very specific plan, a plan that had worked twice before in other cities, and that she intended to execute for the 3rd and final time. Melissa was not a bad person by nature. But at some point in her life, after failed relationships, bills that never balanced, and the constant feeling that she was always running in circles, she had made a decision. She would use what she had to get what she wanted. And what she had was intelligence, beauty, and an impressive ability to read people. Her first marriage had been to a businessman from a small city in the interior of Gonzales. It lasted 8 months. She left with a settlement of 150,000 reais after an out-of-court agreement. The second was with a cattle rancher from Goliad. It lasted only 5 months, but earned her 280,000 reais and a car. Now, Melissa was looking for the third, and she promised herself final target. Someone with enough money that she could finally retire from that life, buy an apartment in a capital city, live peacefully, and never again have to worry about bills or men. It was Mrs. Maria, without knowing it, who gave Melissa exactly what she was looking for. "You know, there's a farmer here, Antônio," Mrs. Maria commented while wrapping bread. "A good man, hard-working, never married. They say he has some good land, but he lives as simply as can be. He needs a woman to take care of him, poor thing." Melissa smiled. "A single farmer? How interesting." "Yes, but don't expect much," Mrs. Maria continued, unaware that she was falling straight into the trap. Antonio is too simple. A good man, but nothing special. He works like a condemned man and lives like a hired hand. Perfect, Melissa thought. Simple men were easier to manipulate. Lonely men were more vulnerable. Single farmers with land, even if they weren't rich, always had assets to divide in a divorce. Melissa began her research. She asked discreetly, observed from a distance, built her profile of the victim. She discovered that Antonio went to the same market every Friday afternoon. She discovered that he attended the 6 o'clock Mass on Sundays. She discovered that he sometimes stopped by Zay's bar to have a beer after work. And then Melissa began to appear in the same places, never in an obvious way, always natural, always casual. One day at the market, she accidentally dropped a basket of fruit near him. "Oh, sorry," she said, crouching down to pick up the oranges that had rolled away. Antonio, polite as always, helped her. "No problem, miss, it happens." You're very kind." Melissa smiled that smile she had practiced 1,000 times in the mirror. "I'm new in town and still getting used to everything." "Welcome, then," Antonio said, lifting his hat slightly before continuing his shopping. First contact established. Melissa was satisfied. He seemed even simpler up close. Perfect. The second, casual encounter was at Mass. Melissa chose to sit 2 pews behind Antonio. After the service, she greeted him with a nod. He returned it politely. The third was at the bar. Melissa walked in saying she was looking for a place to have dinner, and the bar owner suggested she try the tilapia portion. "Sit there, dear. Today it's full." Full meant 6 people in the bar. Melissa ended up sitting near Antonio, who was alone at a corner table. "We run into each other a lot around here," Melissa commented with a smile. "I think we keep the same schedule." Antonio looked at her with those calm eyes that showed little emotion. "Yeah, small town, you end up crossing paths." "May I sit here?" Melissa asked, pointing to the empty chair. "I don't like eating alone." And that was how it began. A casual conversation that turned into 2 hours of talk. Melissa used all her techniques. She asked questions about him, showed genuine interest, laughed at his simple jokes, lightly touched his arm when she wanted to emphasize something. Antonio was polite, but reserved. He spoke about the farm in vague terms, about his work in a superficial way. He didn't brag, didn't try to impress, didn't show any obvious romantic interest. That only made Melissa more confident. He was exactly what she thought, a lonely countryman who would be easy to win over. What Melissa didn't know was that during that entire conversation, Antonio was reading her with the same attention he used when reading the soil before planting. He noticed the nails that were too expensive for someone who claimed to be starting a simple job. He noticed the brand name, perfume, subtle but recognizable. He noticed how she asked specific questions about properties, about family, about past relationships, always disguised as innocent curiosity. Antonio had known opportunistic women before. He had received attention from widows, from divorcees, from women who appeared out of nowhere with cakes and smiles. He had always politely declined, always kept his distance. But Melissa was different. She was good, very good. And for the first time in years, Antonio felt something he almost never felt: curiosity. He wanted to see how far she would go. He wanted to watch the plan unfold. And more importantly, he wanted to teach a lesson she would never forget. Because Antonio was not just an intelligent farmer. He was a man who believed in consequences, who believed in justice, and who had enough patience to wait for the right moment. So he decided to do something that would surprise even himself when he looked back months later. He decided to let her win, or at least let her think she was winning. In the following weeks, Melissa executed her plan with the precision of a surgeon. She ran into Antonio regularly, always casually, always friendly. She began attending the same mass time as him. She accepted rides when she was, coincidentally, without a car. She called asking for help with small things in the house she had rented. A leaky faucet, a burned-out light bulb, things anyone could fix alone, but that gave her excuses to be in his presence. Antonio always helped, always polite, always willing, but never taking the next step. That frustrated Melissa a little. She was used to men who fell quickly, who made declarations, who rushed things. But Antonio was different. He was slow, patient, almost frustrating in his calmness. "Doesn't he realize I'm interested?" Melissa thought, lying in her bed at night, planning her next moves. But Antonio realized. He noticed every calculated look, every deliberate touch, every carefully chosen word, and he played her game better than she imagined, because he had an advantage Melissa didn't know existed. He knew he was being manipulated and had consciously decided to allow it. It was Antonio who finally took what seemed to be the first real step. On a Saturday afternoon, after fixing a fence on her property, he said, "Melissa, do you like homemade food? My cook makes the best chicken with okra you've ever eaten in your life. How about coming to the farm for dinner tomorrow?" A cook? The word made Melissa's eyes light up internally. Simple farmers didn't have cooks. Maybe he had more money than he let on. "I'd love to," she replied with calculated enthusiasm. The following Sunday, Melissa arrived at Golden Valley Farm for the first time. She wore a simple but pretty dress, nothing too flashy, just enough to look like she had dressed nicely without overdoing it. She brought a bottle of wine, not very expensive, but of good quality. When she entered the property and saw the main house, Melissa almost laughed in relief. It was exactly what she expected. Simple, old, well cared for, but definitely modest. Nothing suggested wealth. This was perfect. Dinner was delicious, Melissa had to admit. The cook, Mrs. Giralda, a 60-year-old woman who had worked for Antonio for decades, had prepared a feast. Melissa made a point of praising every dish, helping clear the table, being kind to Mrs. Giralda. "She's good, that girl," Mrs. Giralda commented to Antonio later while washing the dishes. "Polite? Helpful?" Antonio just smiled. "Yes, she's interesting." Interesting wasn't exactly the word Donna Giralda was expecting, but she let it go. After dinner, Antonio and Melissa sat on the porch. The night was cool, the sky was full of stars you only see far from city pollution. It was the perfect moment, Melissa knew. "Have you ever felt lonely here, Antonio?" she asked, her voice soft. "Sometimes," he admitted, looking at the sky. "But loneliness isn't necessarily bad. You learn a lot about yourself when you're alone. But wouldn't it be better to have someone to share all this?" Melissa gestured broadly toward the farm. "Someone to be with you? To build something together?" Antonio looked at her. His dark, deep eyes seemed to read through her in a way that made Melissa slightly uncomfortable. But then he smiled, that calm smile she already knew. "You're right," he said. "It would be better." There it was. The opening Melissa had been waiting for. She smiled back, lightly touched his hand, and let the silence do the rest of the work. In the weeks that followed, the relationship evolved exactly as Melissa had planned. They began seeing each other more regularly. Antonio took her to simple dinners in town. Melissa cooked for him a few times. They watched the sunset on the farm's porch. To the entire town, it was a genuine and beautiful romance. "It's good that Antonio finally found someone," people commented at the market. "He deserves to be happy." Melissa played her role perfectly. She was attentive without being suffocating, interested without being obviously opportunistic, affectionate without being excessive. She learned about soybeans, about crops, about farm work. She asked questions, showed admiration, praised his hard work, and Antonio? Antonio continued being exactly who he had always been, simple, hard-working, patient. He gave Melissa wildflowers, not jewelry, took her for rides around the property in his pickup truck, not on expensive trips. He talked about simple future plans, about maybe building a larger porch on the house, about planting more fruit trees. Melissa accepted everything with smiles and kisses on the cheek. Internally, she was already calculating. If the farm had 340 hectares, even if the land wasn't worth much, it was still millions in assets. She wouldn't need much in a divorce. 30–40% would already be enough for her plans. 3 months after the first dinner, Antonio asked her to marry him. It was in the same place, on the porch at sunset. No grand gestures, no expensive ring, just a simple question. "Melissa, will you marry me?" Melissa pretended to be surprised, pretended to be emotional, pretended she needed a moment to process it, and then, with carefully controlled tears in her eyes, she said, "Yes, Antonio, yes." The wedding was scheduled for 2 months later, simple, at the town church, only close family and friends. Melissa suggested they didn't need anything elaborate. "What matters is that we're together," she said, touching his face tenderly. Antonio agreed. "You're right, simple is better." But before the wedding, there was something important to resolve: the documents. Melissa knew this was the most delicate moment. She needed to make sure there would not be total separation of assets. She needed at least partial community property, preferably full community property. "Antonio," she said one day, while they were planning the details, "have you thought about how we're going to organize things? Practical matters, you know, financial?" "Oh, yes," Antonio replied calmly. "I'll take you to my lawyer next week. He'll prepare everything properly." Melissa felt a stab of alert. "Lawyer? For what? Can't we just—" "It's important to do things the right way," Antonio interrupted gently. "To protect you, to protect us. Do you trust me?" And there it was, the test. If Melissa refused, she would show suspicious concern about financial matters. If she accepted, she would have to trust that she could manipulate the situation later. "Of course I trust you," she said, lightly kissing him. "I just think we don't need to complicate things. But if it's important to you, that's fine." "It's important," Antonio confirmed. And then he added, with that calm smile, "I want you to be protected. You'll see." Protected. The word echoed in Melissa's mind in a strange way, but she dismissed the feeling. Everything was under control. He was just another love-struck farmer wanting to do things the right way. What Melissa didn't know was that at that exact moment, Antonio was 3 moves ahead, and the board was being set up in a way she would only realize when it was already too late to do anything about it. The following week would be revealing, and not in the way Melissa expected. Dr. Ricardo's office was in a simple commercial room on the town's main street. A discreet sign on the door, a secretary who was also his niece, furniture that had seen better decades. To Melissa, this confirmed everything. Antonio really was a simple man, with modest resources, who used a small-town lawyer to handle basic matters. She entered the office with Antonio on Thursday afternoon, wearing a discreet business outfit, her polite smile perfectly calibrated. Dr. Ricardo was a man in his early 50s, bald, with reading glasses hanging around his neck and an expression that revealed absolutely nothing. "Please, have a seat," he said, pointing to the worn leather chairs in front of his desk. Melissa sat down, crossed her legs elegantly, and waited. "Well, as Antonio explained to me, you're getting married soon and want to organize the legal matters properly," Dr. Ricardo began, opening a thick folder on the desk. "It's always wise to do this beforehand. It avoids future problems. Exactly, Antonio agreed calmly. So, I've prepared some documents here, Dr. Ricardo continued, turning pages. First, we have the prenuptial agreement, establishing total separation of assets. Melissa felt her stomach tighten. Total separation? No, this couldn't be happening. Dr. Ricardo, she said, keeping her sweet tone, but with a hint of concern. Total separation? But wouldn't partial community property be more natural? After all, we're going to build a life together. Isn't that what couples normally do? Dr. Ricardo looked at her over his glasses. Normally, yes. But Antonio has some particularities in his situation that make total separation more appropriate. Particularities? Melissa looked at Antonio, confused. What particularities? Antonio was sitting calmly, that same serene smile on his face. Melissa, there are some things about my financial situation that I haven't mentioned yet. Not because I was hiding them, but because, well, they didn't seem relevant until now. Melissa felt something strange in the air, a subtle shift, like when the wind changes direction before a storm. What financial situation? She asked, her voice still controlled, but with a note of tension. Doctor, Ricardo flipped through some documents. Mrs. Melissa, Mr. Antonio da Silva, currently owns assets valued at approximately 243 million reais, distributed among rural properties, financial investments, business holdings, and other assets. Melissa's world stopped for a second. 243 million, not tens of millions, not 100 million, 243. She blinked, trying to process it. I'm sorry, I think I didn't hear that right. 243 million reais, Dr. Ricardo repeated calmly, as if he were talking about an electricity bill. It's a considerable estate, built over 3 decades of extremely successful work in agribusiness and related investments. Melissa looked at Antonio, who remained seated calmly, watching her with those calm eyes that suddenly seemed much more attentive than she had realized before. You are, she began. Rich? Yes, Antonio said simply. Very rich, actually. But I prefer to live simply. I always have. Melissa's mind was racing. 243 million. That changed everything. This wasn't just a good move. This was the move of a lifetime. With that amount, even total separation with some kind of later agreement, some compensation, anything could yield millions, much more than she had ever dreamed. But then reality hit her. Total separation of assets meant she would have no automatic right to anything. Zero. Nothing. Antonio, she said, and for the first time her voice faltered slightly, if you have all this wealth, why live that way? Why did you never tell me? Because money attracts the wrong people, Antonio replied, his voice still calm, but with something firmer underneath. It attracts people who don't love you for who you are, but for what you have. It attracts opportunists, gold diggers. I've always been careful about that. There was something in the way he said gold diggers that made Melissa feel a chill down her spine. I'm not... Antonio, do you think I'm with you for money? She put indignation into her voice, exactly the kind of indignation an unjustly accused woman would show. I didn't even know you had money. I thought you were just a simple farmer. I know you thought that, Antonio said, and there was something in his tone Melissa couldn't decipher. Dr. Ricardo interrupted the moment. Mr. Antonio, Mrs. Melissa is right to question this. Perhaps it would be better for you two to discuss this privately before proceeding with the documents. No, Antonio said, still looking at Melissa. We can proceed. Melissa will sign the total separation of assets. Won't you, Melissa? It was a question, but it sounded like a statement, a test. If Melissa refused now, she would confirm every suspicion. If she accepted, she would lose any automatic right to his fortune. Melissa felt she was at a crossroads. Her mind calculated quickly. If she refused, the wedding probably wouldn't happen. If she accepted, she would have to find another way to ensure she received something when she divorced him. Maybe he would include her in his will. Maybe she could get transfers during the marriage. Maybe... "Of course I'll sign," she finally said, forcing tears into her eyes. "Antonio, I love you, not for your money. I don't care if you have 200 million or 200 rays. I just want to be with you." It was her best performance yet. Real tears, trembling voice, calculated vulnerability. Antonio watched her for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I believe you, Melissa, but we're going to do it this way anyway, to protect both of us." But if it's to protect both of us," Melissa said quickly, seeing an opening, "shouldn't we have some kind of agreement that protects my side too? What if something happens to you? What if—" "I've already thought about that," Antonio interrupted. "Dr. Ricardo, can you explain the second part?" Dr. Ricardo turned more pages. "Yes, Mr. Antonio is establishing a protection fund. If you remain married for at least 5 years, and if the marriage ends for natural reasons such as death, Melissa will automatically receive 10 million reais, in addition to the right to continue living in the main house of the farm for the rest of her life. 10 million, 5 years. Melissa did the math quickly. 2 million per year. It wasn't what she originally planned. Quick marriages followed by profitable divorces, but 10 million was 10 million. "And if the marriage ends before 5 years?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "If it ends by divorce before 5 years, there is no right to the fund," Dr. Ricardo explained. "If it ends by death, there is a proportional scale. 1 year, 2 million. 2 years, 4 million, and so on." "And if it's a divorce after 5 years?" Melissa insisted. "Then the situation changes," Antonio said. "After 5 years, if there is a divorce for any reason that is not proven to be caused by you, such as infidelity on your part, for example, you still receive the 10 million. Melissa processed that. 5 years was longer than she wanted, but 10 million was more money than she had ever obtained before. And maybe, just maybe, with 243 million available, she could manipulate things to receive even more during those 5 years. "All right," she finally said, wiping the fake tears from her eyes. "If that's what you want, Antonio. But I want you to know that this doesn't change how I feel. I love you." "I know," Antonio said, and for the first time Melissa couldn't read his tone. They signed the documents. Melissa signed each page with her best smile, with her best performance as a woman in love who accepted everything for love. Dr. Ricardo witnessed it. His secretary did as well, and everything was notarized that same afternoon. When they left the office, Melissa hugged Antonio on the sidewalk. "I'm sorry if it seemed like I was questioning you in there. I was just surprised, you know, but I'm happy for us." "I'm happy too," Antonio said, kissing her forehead. But as they walked toward the pickup truck, Melissa was thinking furiously. 5 years. She could endure 5 years. And during that time, she would work to ensure she got much more than 10 million. After all, a man with that much money would certainly make transfers to his wife, right? Gifts, joint accounts, investments in her name. What Melissa didn't know was that while she was planning how to extract more money over the next 5 years, Antonio had already planned something very different, and that every step she took from then on would be carefully documented, recorded, and registered in a way she would only discover when it was too late. The game wasn't just beginning. The game was already 3 moves ahead, and Melissa was playing chess while Antonio was playing something completely different. The wedding took place on a sunny Saturday morning at the small white church in the center of town. Melissa wore a simple but elegant white lace dress she had bought at a store in the capital. Not too expensive. After all, she was playing the role of a woman who loved a simple man. Antonio wore his best suit, a navy blue one that was probably 15 years old but perfectly preserved. He looked more handsome than Melissa expected. There was something different about him that day. A straighter posture, a firmer gaze. The ceremony was quick and traditional. About 40 people were present, neighbors, farm workers, some distant relatives of Antonio, a few friends Melissa had made in town. Nothing extravagant, nothing that drew attention. When the priest asked, "Do you accept this man as your lawful husband?" Melissa looked into Antonio's eyes and said, "Yes," with all the conviction she could put into her voice. It was only 5 years, she thought, 5 years and 10 million. She could do that in her sleep. The reception was held on the farm itself. Mrs. Giralda had prepared a feast: crispy roast pig, free-range chicken, rice with sausage, bean stew, everything a countryside wedding celebration should have. There was a local band playing traditional country music, and people danced in an area that had been cleared near the barn. Melissa played her role perfectly. She danced with Antonio, talked to all the guests, thanked them for the simple gifts they received. She was the perfect bride, the perfect wife, the perfect addition to that farmer's life. "May God bless you," Donna Maria said, hugging Melissa. "You were made for each other." "Thank you," Melissa replied with a sincere smile. If only you knew, she thought. The party ended at dusk. People left, the band packed up, and finally Antonio and Melissa were alone in the main house. "Well," Antonio said, closing the door, "now we are officially husband and wife." "We are," Melissa agreed, moving closer to him. She had planned this moment. The wedding night was important. It was when she would consolidate her position, when she would show herself to be the perfect wife, when she would begin building the image she would need over the next 5 years. But Antonio surprised her. "I'm exhausted," he said with a yawn. "How about we leave the celebrations for tomorrow? I need to wake up early, even though it's Sunday. I have to check a few things in the fields." Melissa blinked, surprised. Her wedding night was being postponed because of soybeans. "Oh," she said, hiding her frustration. "Of course, no problem. You must really be tired." They slept in separate bedrooms that night. "Just until I renovate the master bedroom," Antonio explained. "I want to make everything nice for you." In the following days, married life began in a strange way. Antonio continued his normal routine, waking up at 4:30, drinking coffee, going out to the fields. Melissa tried to adjust, tried to find her place in that house, in that life. "Mrs. Giralda," she said on the 3rd day, "let me help you with lunch." "No need, dear," Mrs. Giralda replied, not rudely. "I've been doing this for 20 years. It's automatic." Melissa tried to get closer to Antonio, tried intimate conversations, tried to create romantic moments. But he was always busy, always had something to check, someone to call, something that needed attention. 2 weeks after the wedding, Melissa finally managed to sit with him on the porch, with 2 glasses of wine, at sunset. "Antonio," she said softly, "I feel like we're not spending much time together. We're newlyweds. We should be enjoying it more." Antonio looked at her with that calm gaze. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's just that the harvest is coming and there's a lot to organize." "I understand your work," Melissa said, touching his hand. "But maybe I could help. After all, I'm your wife now. I can learn about the business, help with administration, finances." "Finances?" Antonio repeated, and there was something in his tone. "Yes, I worked with accounting, remember? I can help organize things, check accounts, manage payments. I have an accounting firm that's been doing that for years," Antonio said calmly. "Everything is very well organized, but I appreciate the offer. What about adding me to the accounts then? Melissa tried another angle. To make household purchases easier, those things. It would be more practical. The household account is in Mrs. Giralda's name, Antonio explained. She's managed it for years. It works well that way. Melissa felt frustration growing. All her attempts to insert herself financially were being blocked politely but firmly. "And an allowance for me?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "For my personal things, you know." "Of course," Antonio said promptly. "How much do you need?" "I don't know." Melissa pretended to consider. "Maybe about 5,000 a month? For clothes, salon, those women's things." 3,000 is enough," Antonio said. "If you need more for something specific, just ask." 3,000. It was less than Melissa expected, but it was still something. She agreed. The months passed. Melissa tried other approaches. She suggested buying a better car for her. "The pickup is great, but maybe something more comfortable for when I need to go into town." Antonio bought her a used Toyota Camry, 3 years old, basic. "It's economical and reliable," he said. Melissa suggested a trip. "A honeymoon, you know. Even if it's late, we could go somewhere nice." "The farm needs me right now," Antonio replied. "Maybe at the end of the year." She suggested renovations to the house. "We could modernize the kitchen, the bathroom." "The house is fine as it is," Antonio said. "It works perfectly." Each suggestion was politely refused. Each attempt to access financial resources was gently blocked. And Melissa began to realize something disturbing. For a man with 243 million reais, Antonio lived as if he had 243,000. Worse yet, he expected her to live the same way. "Antonio," she said one night, 6 months after the wedding, her patience beginning to fail, "I'm not asking for absurd luxuries. I just want us to live a little better. You have the resources for that." "I do," he agreed calmly, "but I choose not to use them that way. I chose this simple life for a reason, Melissa. I thought you understood that." "I understand, but you expected me to change after the wedding," Antonio interrupted, and for the first time there was a different tone in his voice. Not anger, but something more dangerous. Awareness. "No," Melissa said quickly. "Of course not. I just thought maybe we could find a middle ground." 3,000 a month is the middle ground," Antonio said. "A roof over your head, food on the table, security. Everything a person really needs." Melissa felt a stab of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. Fear that her plan was failing. Fear that she had completely underestimated the man she had married. But no, she thought. 5 years. She just needed to endure 5 years. 10 million was still 10 million. What Melissa didn't know was that every conversation they had was being recorded. Every financial request was being documented. Every attempt she made to access resources was being meticulously logged. And Antonio? Antonio was simply waiting for her to fully reveal her true colors, waiting for her to make the mistake he knew would come. Because Antonio knew people like Melissa, and he knew that impatient people always, eventually make mistakes. He only needed patience, and patience was something a farmer who had built an empire from scratch had in abundance. The first year of marriage passed slowly for Melissa. An entire year of accumulated frustrations, blocked attempts, of a life that was comfortable but frustrating and limiting. She had tried everything. She had tried being the perfect wife, cooking when Mrs. Giralda allowed it, keeping the house organized, participating in church activities. She had tried being seductive, provocative clothes on the right occasions, romantic dinners, subtle insinuations. She had tried being a business partner, offering help, suggesting improvements, showing genuine interest in the farm. Nothing worked. Antonio remained polite, even friendly, but distant. They rarely had physical intimacy. The finances remained completely separate and inaccessible, and the 3,000 per month she received were monitored. not directly. But Melissa realized that Antonio always knew exactly where she spent every single cent. "It's like living in a golden prison," she vented over the phone to her friend Carla from the previous city. "Except it's not even that golden." "How many years are left until the 10 million?" Carla asked. 4, Melissa replied, feeling the weight of those future years. 4 entire years. "It's worth it," Carla encouraged. 10 million, Mel. Think about it. But Melissa was starting to doubt. And it was in that doubt, in that growing frustration, that she made her first real mistake. The mistake was called Ricardo Almeida. He was a 35-year-old agronomist whom Antonio had hired to supervise a new planting area. Handsome, single, charming in just the right measure. And unlike Antonio, Ricardo paid attention to Melissa. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Melissa." He greeted her whenever he saw her with that smile that lasted 1 second longer than it should. At first, Melissa ignored it. She wasn't stupid. She knew that any affair would completely ruin her chances of receiving the 10 million. The agreement was clear. Proven infidelity on her part meant losing everything. But Ricardo was persistent, and worse, he was attentive in a way Antonio was not. "Let me help you with that," Ricardo said when he saw her carrying groceries. "You look beautiful today," he commented casually. "If you need anything at all, I'm always available," he offered with that smile. 3 months after Ricardo started working on the farm, Melissa made her first slip. It was small, almost insignificant. She was on the porch, frustrated after yet another argument with Antonio about money, when Ricardo passed by. "Are you okay, Mrs. Melissa?" he asked, noticing her expression. "Not really," she admitted, and before she could stop herself, added, "Do you have a cigarette?" Melissa hadn't smoked in years, but at that moment she needed something, anything. Ricardo pulled out a pack, sat down beside her on the porch. They smoked in silence for a moment. "Problems in paradise?" Ricardo asked softly. "You have no idea," Melissa replied, and then caught herself. "Sorry, I shouldn't be talking about this with you." "Why not?" Ricardo shrugged. "Sometimes we need to vent, and I know how to keep a secret." That's how it started. Occasional conversations that became frequent. Casual encounters that became less casual. Text messages that began innocent but grew more intimate. Melissa knew she was playing with fire, but she was so frustrated, so lonely in that strange marriage with that impenetrable man that she couldn't stop. "He doesn't even touch you?" Ricardo asked one day, when they were talking near the barn, where no one could see them. "Rarely," Melissa admitted. "It's like I'm a tenant, not a wife." "That's not right," Ricardo said, moving closer. "A woman like you—" Melissa knew where that was going. Part of her wanted to stop, but another part, the frustrated and irritated part, wanted to continue just to see what would happen. "Ricardo," she said softly, "you know I'm married." "I know," he replied, even closer. "But unhappily married." They kissed. Right there, in the barn, where anyone could have seen them. It was quick, it was wrong, and it was exactly the mistake Melissa would later realize she should never have made. Because 3 meters above them, hidden in the barn's structure, there was a security camera that Melissa didn't know existed. In the days that followed, Melissa and Ricardo met more times. Always quickly, always hidden, always with the adrenaline of those who know they are doing something wrong. They didn't go as far as consummating a full affair. Melissa still had that line she didn't want to cross completely. But they were close. And every single time, cameras Melissa didn't know about recorded everything. 1 month after the first kiss, Antonio called Melissa for a conversation on the porch. It was a Saturday night after dinner. "Melissa," he began, with that calm tone she had learned to hate, We need to talk about Ricardo." Melissa's heart raced, but she kept a neutral expression. "Ricardo? The agronomist? What about him?" "I'm going to have to fire him," Antonio said casually. "He's not meeting expectations." "Oh," Melissa said, relieved and disappointed at the same time. "That's a shame. He seemed competent." "He is competent at work," Antonio agreed, looking directly at her. "The problem is that he's been engaging in inappropriate behavior." Melissa felt her blood turn cold. "What kind of behavior?" "Involvement with the boss's wife, for example," Antonio said, his tone still calm, but there was steel beneath those words. The silence that followed was deafening. Melissa tried to think of something to say, some denial, some explanation, but the way Antonio was looking at her made it clear that he knew. He knew everything. "Antonio," she began, but he raised his hand. "Let me spare you the effort of making excuses," he said. "I know everything, Melissa. I know about every conversation, every meeting, every hidden kiss in the barn. I have it all recorded, with date and time." Melissa felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "You were spying on me." "I was observing you," Antonio corrected. "I've had security cameras all over the farm for years. It's a large property with a lot of expensive equipment. Security is important." "You betrayed me," Melissa accused, grasping for something to attack. "You invaded my privacy." "I monitored my property," Antonio replied calmly. "The cameras are in public areas of the farm, not in bedrooms or bathrooms. It's completely legal, and they caught you cheating on your husband." "I didn't cheat," Melissa protested, desperate. "It was just a few kisses. That's not—" "It's enough," Antonio interrupted. "According to our prenuptial agreement, any act of infidelity on your part, defined as any physical or romantic involvement with another person, completely nullifies your right to the protection fund. You can check with Dr. Ricardo if you want. It's very clear in the clauses." Melissa felt real panic for the first time. "Antonio, please. It was a mistake. I was confused, frustrated. It meant nothing. It meant enough for you to risk 10 million, Antonio said, and for the first time there was something like disappointment in his voice. Not anger, but disappointment. "You couldn't even last a year and a half, Melissa. Out of 5 years, you didn't even last a year and a half before showing who you really are." "Who I really am," Melissa repeated, feeling anger mixed with fear. "And who am I?" "A woman who married me for money," Antonio said simply. "A woman who pretended love, who played a role, who calculated every step, thinking she was smarter than the stupid farmer she underestimated." The words hit Melissa like punches, because they were true. All of them. "You knew," she murmured. "From the beginning, you knew." "I did," Antonio confirmed. "I recognized you from that very first casual encounter at the market. I recognized every technique, every move, every calculated word. Because it wasn't the first time someone tried to do this to me, Melissa. You were just the most persistent." "Then why did you marry me?" Melissa asked, genuinely confused. "If you knew, why did you go through all of this?" Antonio remained silent for a long moment, looking at the dark horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. "Because I was tired," he said. "Tired of living alone, tired of distrusting everyone, tired of never knowing if someone liked me or my money, and part of me, as foolish as it sounds, hoped that maybe, just maybe, you could learn to truly love me, that maybe you would discover there is more to life than money." "Antonio?" Melissa felt something strange in her chest. It wasn't love, but it was something. Guilt, perhaps. "But you didn't learn," Antonio continued. "You only got frustrated because you couldn't access the money fast enough, and the second someone appeared who gave you attention, you jumped ship, even knowing what was at stake." "And now," Melissa asked, her voice small, Now you have two options, Antonio said, finally looking at her again. Option one, we divorce right now. You leave with nothing but the clothes on your back, exactly as stated in the contract. Option two, you stay, finish the 5 years, and even with the infidelity, I will consider giving you something. Not the 10 million, but something fair for having spent those years here. Melissa blinked. Why? Why would you give me anything after what I did? Because unlike you, Antonio said calmly, I still believe in giving people what they deserve for the work they've done, even if that work was pretending to be my wife. And because, believe it or not, I still have a small bit of hope that you might learn something over these next years. Melissa didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to take option one, run from that humiliation, start over somewhere else. But another part of her, the practical part that had guided her this far, knew that something was better than nothing. How much would that something be? She asked, hating herself for asking. That depends on how you behave over the next years, Antonio replied. But I can guarantee at least 1 million. Maybe more if you truly try to change. 1 million. It was far less than 10, but it was still 1 million, still more than she had now. And Ricardo? She asked. He's fired, obviously, Antonio said. And if I catch you trying to contact him or any other man besides me over the next years, the offer drops to 0. Understood? Melissa nodded, defeated. Then we have a new agreement, Antonio said. You stay, complete the 5 years as my wife in name, and at the end, depending on how you behave, you receive between 1 and 3 million. Do you accept? Melissa thought for a long moment. Then she nodded again. Good, Antonio said, standing up. Then we remain married, but now you know that I know, and I will watch you the way a hawk watches a mouse. One wrong move, Melissa, and you leave here with nothing, absolutely nothing. He went inside, leaving Melissa alone on the porch in the dark, processing everything that had happened. And for the first time in her life, Melissa understood what it meant to be completely outplayed in her own game. But the story did not end there. Because Antonio had a bigger plan, something Melissa had not yet realized. And the next 3.5 years would be not only a punishment, but a lesson that would change Melissa in ways she never imagined possible. Because Antonio was not only intelligent, he was also, against all odds, a good man. And good men sometimes do things that seem cruel, but are, in the end, the greatest compassion possible. The days following that conversation on the porch were the hardest of Melissa's life. She woke up every morning with the weight of reality. She was trapped in a marriage that had been exposed, trapped to a man who knew all her lies, trapped by her own greed that had brought her there. Ricardo left the next day without even saying goodbye. Melissa did not try to contact him. It wasn't worth the risk. But the strangest thing was that Antonio did not change his behavior much. He remained polite, continued speaking to her normally, continued living his routine. It was as if nothing had happened, except that now there was a naked truth between them. "Good morning," he said every morning, drinking his coffee. "Good morning," Melissa replied, not knowing how to act. 1 week after that night, Antonio called her again to talk. "Melissa, if you're going to stay for the next years, we need to establish some rules," he said, without beating around the bush. "What rules?" she asked, cautious. "First, no men, no flirting, no involvement, not even very close friendships. You are married and you will behave as such." Melissa nodded. It was expected. "Second, you will work, for real. You will no longer stay in the house doing nothing while Mrs. Giralda does everything. You will learn about the farm, help where necessary, and contribute." "Work," Melissa repeated, surprised. "Doing what?" "We'll find out," Antonio said. "You said you worked with accounting. I'll put you to help my accountant organize the farm's records. After that, you can learn other things." "Antonio, I don't—" "It's not a suggestion," he interrupted. "If you're going to be here, you will earn your stay. I will not have a parasitic wife living off my charity." The words hurt, but Melissa knew she had no choice. "Third," Antonio continued, "your 3,000 per month will continue, but now you will have to account for every single cent. I will know exactly where you're spending it." "That's humiliating," Melissa protested. "That's consequence," Antonio corrected. "You lost my trust. Now you have to earn it back." And that was how Melissa's life changed completely. In the mornings, she began working in the farm office, a small annex to the main house where the accountant, Mr. Mario, a 60-year-old man with infinite patience, taught her how to organize paperwork, register expenses, categorize income. At first, Melissa hated it. She hated waking up early, hated the repetitive work, hated feeling like she was being punished. But Mario was kind, and little by little she began to understand the farm's numbers. "Look at this," Mr. Mario showed her one day. "This crop here yielded 300% profit on the investment. Antonio knows how to choose the right timing to plant and sell." Melissa looked at the numbers, and for the first time felt something like admiration. Antonio's fortune was not luck. It was pure work, knowledge, and perfect timing. After 3 months working in accounting, Antonio moved her to another role, helping Mrs. Giralda manage the house, but in a more serious way. Planning menus, making smart purchases, saving where possible. "Why do I need to save?" Melissa asked, frustrated. "You're a millionaire." "Because that's how millionaires stay millionaires," Antonio replied. "Wasting money is not a virtue, even when you have a lot." Melissa learned to plan meals, to shop at the local market where products were cheaper, to make things last. She learned that there was satisfaction in balancing a budget, in finding a good bargain, in not wasting. 6 months after the incident with Ricardo, Antonio took her to the field. "Today you'll work with the planting team," he said. "What?" Melissa looked at her own hands, the nails that had once been so carefully manicured. "You're kidding." "I'm not. Put on boots, apply sunscreen, and come." Melissa spent that day planting. Not heavy labor. Antonio was not cruel, but enough to understand the process, to feel the sun on her back, to see the sweat running down the workers' faces, to understand where every cent of that fortune came from. At the end of the day, she was exhausted, dirty, and surprisingly satisfied. There was something about working the land, about seeing the rows planted, about knowing she was contributing to something bigger. "How was it?" Antonio asked when she returned home. "Tiring," Melissa admitted, "but interesting." Antonio smiled, not a victorious smile, but something gentler. "Tomorrow you'll work with irrigation, then with the equipment maintenance team. I want you to understand every part of this operation." The months continued to pass. Melissa worked in every department of the farm. She learned about soil, about climate, about agricultural machines. She learned the names of all 23 employees, their stories, their families. And something strange began to happen. She began to like it, not the marriage, that was still strange and distant, but the work, the farm, the feeling of building something. For the first time in her adult life, Melissa was not just trying to take advantage of someone. She was truly working. A year and a half after the night of the revelation, Melissa was in the office when Mr. Mario showed her a discrepancy in the books. "Look here, Melissa," he said, pointing. "There's something wrong with these payments to the fertilizer supplier. The numbers don't add up." Melissa analyzed them. "They're charging 20% more than the original contract." "Exactly," Mr. Mario agreed. "Either it's a mistake or it's theft," Melissa finished. She could have ignored it, could have pretended she didn't see it, but she surprised herself by saying, "I'll talk to Antonio." That night, she presented the discovery. "The supplier is stealing from you," she explained, showing the numbers. They've probably diverted around 200,000 over the last 2 years. Antonio analyzed the documents. Then he looked at her with something new in his eyes. Respect. Good job, he said. Very good indeed. They were only 2 words, but Melissa felt something strange. Pride. Genuine pride for having done something useful, something honest. Antonio confronted the supplier, recovered part of the diverted money, and changed partners. And Melissa found herself checking the books more carefully, looking for other irregularities, truly wanting to protect the business. 2 years had passed since the incident with Ricardo. Melissa was different. She had muscles she didn't have before, from physical work. She wore less makeup because it didn't make sense to get overly done up to work in the field. She had more calloused hands, more tanned skin, and surprisingly, she was healthier than she had been in years. "You've changed," Antonio commented one day, out of the blue. They were on the porch, like that night 2 years earlier, but everything felt different now. "Have I?" Melissa asked. "You're more real," Antonio said, searching for the right words. "Less mask, more you." Melissa didn't know what to say, because he was right. She had changed. She was no longer the calculating woman who had arrived in that town, no longer the con artist who had planned to use and discard a naive farmer. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted, and it was the most honest thing she had said in years. "You're someone who works hard," Antonio said, "someone who learned the value of things, someone who discovered that satisfaction does not come from spending money, but from earning it honestly." "You planned this," Melissa suddenly realized. "All of this. It wasn't just punishment, it was education." Antonio did not deny it. "I could have thrown you out that day, but I saw something in you, Melissa, wasted potential, intelligence being used the wrong way, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, I can show you a better path." "Why?" Melissa asked, genuinely confused. "Why care?" "Because, deep down," Antonio said calmly, "you remind me of myself. When I was young, I was too ambitious, willing to do questionable things to move up in life. Someone gave me a chance, taught me the right way. I thought maybe you deserved the same chance." Melissa felt tears, real ones, not calculated, fill her eyes. "I don't deserve it," she said. "Not after what I did." "Maybe not," Antonio agreed. "But people don't need to deserve second chances to receive them. Sometimes we just need to be willing to change when the chance appears." That night, Melissa understood something fundamental. Antonio was not just intelligent, not just rich. He was genuinely good, and she had tried to destroy one of the most decent men she had ever known. There was still 1.5 years left to complete the 5 years. And for the first time, Melissa was not counting the days to receive the money and leave. She was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, there was something more valuable than money there. But the greatest test was still to come. And when it arrived, Melissa would have to choose between the person she was and the person she was becoming. And Antonio? Antonio continued watching, continued waiting, continued believing in something most people would have given up on long ago. Because that is the difference between people who only know how to play the game and people who truly understand what it means to win. Winning is not about destroying your opponent. Sometimes it is about transforming them. There were 8 months left to complete the 5 years of marriage when everything changed again. Melissa was in the office reviewing export contracts when Antonio entered with an expression she had never seen before. Worry, real worry. "Melissa," he said, sitting heavily in the chair, "I need to talk to you about something serious." She closed the laptop immediately. Over the past years, she had learned to read Antonio better. And that was not the expression of someone about to bring bad business news. "What happened?" she asked, feeling genuine anxiety. "I went to the doctor today," Antonio began, taking a deep breath. "Those exams I did last month, the results were not good." Melissa's heart tightened. "Not good how?" "I have a heart condition, serious. I need surgery, and even with it, the doctors don't guarantee that I'll have many years ahead." Melissa felt as if someone had punched her in the stomach. "How serious?" "5 years, maybe 10 if the surgery works well and I follow all treatments," Antonio said calmly. That calm he always had, but that now felt more like acceptance. "Maybe less." "Antonio..." Melissa didn't know what to say. For the first time in 3.5 years, she genuinely cared about what was happening. It wasn't about money. It was about the man sitting in front of her, the man who had been patient with her when she didn't deserve it, who had taught her when he could have simply thrown her out. "The surgery is in 2 months, Antonio continued, "and there's something I need to tell you before that." He pulled out a folder of documents. "I updated my will," he said. "After the surgery, if everything goes well, you'll still complete the 5 years of our agreement. But if something goes wrong during the procedure..." "Don't talk like that," Melissa interrupted, surprising both of them. Antonio smiled slightly. "Melissa, I need to be practical. If something happens to me, you will receive more than you imagined." He opened the folder, showing the documents. 20 million reais, he said, plus the house and 50 hectares of the best land. In addition, you will remain as administrator of the farm until my nephew turns 25. Melissa looked at the numbers, but did not feel the euphoria she would have felt 4 years earlier. She felt something completely different: horror. "I don't want your money," she heard herself say, and it was true. "I want you to be okay." Antonio studied her with those calm eyes. "You really changed, didn't you?" Melissa felt tears, genuine, unplanned, uncalculated, run down her face. "I'm sorry, Antonio, for everything, for every lie, every manipulation, for being so horrible." "I know," Antonio said gently, "but you are not that person anymore, and that's why I'm leaving all this to you, because I trust you to take care of the farm, the employees, everything I built." "I don't deserve this," Melissa said, and it was the pure truth. "Maybe not," Antonio agreed, "but it's not about deserving. It's about recognizing that you learned, that you changed, and it's about having someone I trust to continue my work if I can't." In the 2 months leading up to the surgery, Melissa became a different person. She took care of Antonio in ways she had never taken care of anyone. She made sure he took his medication, ate properly, didn't stress too much about work. "You're smothering me," Antonio joked one day. "Well," Melissa replied without smiling, "you'll have to deal with it." She also began to think about what she would do if the worst happened, and she realized she didn't want the money. Not that way, not at the cost of losing Antonio. When she questioned that feeling internally, Melissa was shocked by the answer. She cared about him, truly. At some point over the past years, between the lessons, the work, and the rare moments of genuine conversation, she had developed something real. It wasn't necessarily romantic love, but it was deep respect, admiration, and genuine affection for someone who had seen the worst in her and had chosen to believe she could be better. The night before the surgery, they sat on the porch once again. "There's something I need to tell you," Melissa said, knowing it could be her last chance. "Go ahead," Antonio encouraged. "When I arrived here almost 5 years ago, I came with a plan," she began. "A horrible plan. I wanted to marry you, wait the minimum necessary time, and then leave you with as much of your fortune as I could get." "I know," Antonio said calmly. "I know that you know," Melissa continued. But what you don't know is how much I hate myself for it now, how I look back and see the person I was and feel ashamed. You gave me something no amount of money could buy, Antonio. You gave me dignity, honest work, purpose. She took a deep breath. If the surgery goes wrong tomorrow, she said, her voice trembling, and if I really receive everything that's in the will, I will use every cent to continue your work. I won't waste it. I won't blow it on trivial things. I will take care of the farm, the employees, everything you built, I promise. Antonio was silent for a long moment. Then, for the first time in almost 5 years, he took her hand. Truly, not just a polite gesture. I believe you, he said. And do you know why? Why? Melissa asked. Honesty, Antonio replied. Finally, after all these years, you are being completely honest with me and with yourself. He squeezed her hand. The surgery will go well, he said with that calm confidence. But even if it doesn't, I will die happy knowing I managed to do something important. I took someone who was lost on the wrong path and helped her find the right one. You are a better man than I deserve, Melissa said, crying openly now. Maybe, Antonio agreed with a half smile. But you are becoming the woman who deserves good things, and that's what matters. The surgery took place the next morning. Melissa waited for 6 endless hours at the hospital, praying in a way she hadn't prayed since childhood, praying not for money, not for inheritance, but genuinely for the life of the man who had changed hers. When the doctor finally came out, Melissa stood up so fast she almost fell. "How is he?" she asked desperately. "The surgery was a success," the doctor said, smiling. "We had some complications, but he's strong. He'll need months of recovery and constant care, but the chances are good." Melissa felt her knees weaken with relief. She sat down, put her hands over her face, and cried. Not calculated tears. Not tears to manipulate. Tears of pure, genuine relief. "Can I see him?" she asked when she managed to compose herself. "In a few hours, when he wakes up from the anesthesia," the doctor replied. When Melissa finally entered the recovery room and saw Antonio awake, pale but alive, she couldn't hold back. She went to the bed, carefully took his hand so as not to disturb the tubes and monitors, and said something she had never said truthfully before. "I love you." And the most surprising thing was that it was true. Not the kind of love she had pretended before. Not the romantic movie kind of love, but a real love built on respect, gratitude, and genuine care for another person. Antonio smiled weakly. "It took you long enough to admit it." "Sorry," Melissa said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I'm slow with these things." "No," Antonio said softly. "You just needed to learn what real love actually means." And there, in that hospital room, something changed permanently between them. They were no longer farmer and con artist, no longer victim and predator, no longer teacher and student. They were simply two people who had gone through something difficult together and had come out the other side transformed. The months of recovery were long. Melissa took care of Antonio with a dedication that surprised even Mrs. Geralda. "That girl has changed," Mrs. Geralda commented to Mr. Mario. "At first, I didn't like her. I thought she was fake. But now it's different." "People can change," Mr. Mario replied wisely, "when they have the right teachers." Antonio recovered slowly but steadily, and as he recovered, something else happened. The relationship between him and Melissa evolved into something neither of them had planned. They began to truly talk. About their lives, their fears, their dreams. Melissa spoke about her difficult childhood, about how she had developed that survival-at-any-cost mindset. Antonio spoke about his loneliness, about how he had built walls so high around himself that almost no one could get in. "You know what's funny?" Antonio said one day, 6 months after the surgery. I planned all this to teach you a lesson, but in the end, you ended up teaching me something too. What? Melissa asked. That people can truly change, he replied. I always believed that in theory, but you proved it in practice. When the 5 years of marriage were finally completed, Melissa and Antonio sat down to review the agreement. Technically, Antonio said, after the infidelity, you would be entitled to only 1 million, maybe 3, if I were being generous. I don't want it, Melissa said, surprising him. You don't want it? Antonio repeated. I don't want the money from the agreement, Melissa explained. I want to earn my own money, working, continuing as administrator of the farm, if you still want my help, but not as payment from the agreement, as honest pay for honest work. Antonio studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, that genuine smile she had learned to recognize. You passed the test, he said. Test? Melissa was confused. The final test, Antonio explained, to see whether you still wanted easy money or if you had really changed. You were testing me? Melissa didn't know whether to feel irritated or impressed. Always, Antonio admitted. But this was the last one, I promise. And you passed. Better than I imagined. He pulled out another document. I already prepared an administration contract for you, he said. Fair salary, profit sharing, full benefits. You'll work because you want to, because you deserve it, not because you're part of a 5-year agreement. Melissa took the document, read the terms, and for the first time in 5 years, signed something without ulterior motives. And what about us? She asked. We're still married on paper, but... But what? Antonio asked. I don't know, Melissa admitted. I don't know what we are now. Antonio was silent, thoughtful. Then, how about we start from scratch, he suggested. No prenuptial agreements, no contracts, no tests, just 2 people who spent 5 years truly getting to know each other and who maybe, just maybe, would like to see where this could go. You would trust me like that? Melissa asked, incredulous. After everything? I trust you, Antonio said simply, because you're not the person who arrived here 5 years ago, and because, believe it or not, I'm not the same either. Melissa felt something warm in her chest. Hope. Real hope. Then yes, she said. Yes to starting over. Yes to doing this the right way. And for the first time in 5 years, they kissed. Not out of obligation, not out of manipulation, not because of a contract, just because they wanted to. The story of Antonio and Melissa did not have the ending anyone expected. There was no dramatic revenge, no severe punishment, no total destruction. There was something better, redemption, transformation, and proof that sometimes the greatest victory is not destroying your enemy, but transforming them into an ally, or better yet, into family.